What's up, everybody? We out here. Guess you could call it a special episode of Go the Mission. Gonna have a little conversation about some of the things that are going on in our world today. And this is not a sermon. I know it's a Saturday morning, but this is not a sermon. This is just food for thought. This is just my perspective on some things, and hopefully it can help encourage the conversations and the desire for understanding that is needed at the particular time in history that we are. But to start, I just want to talk about this experience that I had back in Palau. So obviously, you listen to the podcast, you know me, you know I spent quite a few years there as a missionary, my first year being the year 2010. And there was something that I'd heard leading up to going to Palau that very much intrigued me, something I was so interested in. And I knew I wanted to give it a shot when I would get there. And this was scuba diving. Now, Palau at the time, and I don't know if it's still the same now, but in 2010, it had just overtaken the Great Barrier Reef over by Australia as the #1 dive spot in the world. So I was excited. Not only am I going on this awesome new adventure, but I'm going to get a chance to learn how to dive and to dive in the most beautiful place in the entire world. To me, that was absolutely incredible. And man, I was hyped up for it. The question came around, who wanted to learn, and a good chunk of the missionaries said, you know what, we want to do it. So got signed up for the classes and we started to go. Now, class was different. I wasn't necessarily ready for that. I mean, we sat down, we were sitting down for hours, a lot of stuff to learn, read, little guide videos we had to watch, and just discussions that we needed to have about making sure that we understood what was going down when it came to diving. And I was cool with it for the most part. And until we got to, it was one of these videos that we were watching, and they were talking about how the air compresses and how your body reacts to the pressure of being, a certain level of depth in the bars and all that kind of stuff. And the thing that got me, I was following along very well until they illustrated our lungs, the human lung, with a balloon in the video. And they showed how if you stop breathing, if you hold your breath underwater and you ascend, that the air expands again and it can actually explode your lung. I saw that. I was like, nah, bro, I ain't about this life. So that was the last dive class that I attended in 2010. I was good with snorkeling. I was good with being able to hold my breath, and when I knew I was running out of breath, come up and get a fresh breath, no problem. I was good with that, could do that all day. But diving, nah, bro, I wasn't gonna be about that. And it's funny because obviously not everyone had done it, and the ones who did complete the training and they got certified, man, they always talked about how much they enjoyed it, weekends they were going and talking about these cool things they were able to see and experience. And I was like, yeah, but it sounds cool and I would check it out, but, and I couldn't get past the but in my experience. And so I didn't do it. I had to listen to those stories the entire year. I saw videos and pictures of their experience all year, but because of my fear, I was relegated to my satisfaction of just having a surface level experience with the ocean, which I loved. And I thought, man, what I'm seeing, that's good enough. my comfort zone of being up there, it wasn't worth the risk in my mind to go and experience something new and something different. It just wasn't worth it. And on the flip side, the people who weren't interested in diving, oh man, they confirmed everything that I was thinking as well. They backed me up, like mind, birds of a feather, as they say. And of course, they were the most uninspiring when it came to diving, and they were the ones who continued to discourage it the most. So, I was in great company as far as I thought at the time. it brings up a good point here that people fear what they don't know and what they don't understand. And that's a reality I think is very pertinent to the times that we find ourselves in. And we'll go into a little bit deeper, but if there's one thing that I knew at the end of that particular missionary year in 2011 when I was coming home, is that, man, did I really miss out on an opportunity? And I say that because this thought would stick with me over the next 5 years until I was able to return to Palau in 2015. And when I was there, I knew the question was going to come about who wanted to learn how to scuba dive. And I knew I was going to be on that list because I needed to conquer my fear. I had let that dog me for the last 6 years. And I was like, you know what? I got to get over it. I got to man up. I got to step up to the plate. I'm going to get the better of my fear, and I'm going to have this experience myself. And so question comes around. I was one of the first people to sign up, and hey, it was game time. And it's funny because I remember seeing others when we went to the training and the certification lessons that were experiencing the same fear that I was 5 years ago. And in my mind, I was like, you know what? You can do it. It's okay. It'll be all right. But they were not at the same place. They hadn't had the same background as me. So their fears were bigger in their minds than the potential of an awesome experience that they could have had. And for me, since I had already been there and been to the point where I had refused the experience, it was there was no way I was going to turn back. But the thing that blew my mind when it came to diving, and this is when I really knew that it was going to be all right. I saw the same video, and I was like, man, there it goes again. But I was like, I'm going past this. The thing that really made it sink that I was going to be okay was the first time that we were actually practicing in the ocean. Yeah, and that's the cool thing about doing it there. We got to practice out in the ocean, not in a pool or anything like that. And I remember having my BCD fully inflated. There's no way I was going to sink all this extra weight on me. You kidding me? And we lean back and we dip over the side of the boat into the ocean. And I deflated my BCD ever so slowly. It's probably the slowest descent I'd ever done. I was really taking my time because I was so nervous about the fact, am I really going to be able to breathe down here? But sure enough, I had the regulator and everything was set, good to go. And I remember taking my first breath underwater and I couldn't believe it. I was like, wait a second. I'm not stressed. I don't feel the pressure. I'm okay. That feeling is not something I ever expected to have feeling underwater. I thought I was going into a place that was literally way over my head. And something where the pressure of being there, I would never be able to handle. But I could breathe. I remember descending down. It was only about 12, 15 feet, but the experience was already set. Because I knew I could breathe down there, I knew I was going to be okay. And things that I would never do, I was afraid of opening my eyes underwater. I wear contacts too, so that adds to it. I didn't care. I was taking off my mask. I was doing all the stuff and opening my eyes so I could see. And it was the coolest experience ever. And then I found myself on the flip side, right? Because after I got my certification, man, I was talking to everybody about diving. and it's funny because the people who were diving as well, oh man, it was like we were in a whole new world, whole new great experience, and people on the outside who thought we were crazy. They couldn't understand it. They couldn't see that you would be okay being in a situation like that where it seems like you're completely out of your control. And yet that's the experience that I was able to have. Again, people fear what they don't know and what they don't understand. And I was able, thankfully, my goodness, I could show you videos for days. I could show you, that getting past my comfort level and this desire to just stay at the surface, man, I appreciated the ocean so much more when I actually started scuba diving. And it's changed my perspective on everything. I know I don't understand everything about the ocean. That's probably impossible. But I do have a newfound respect and appreciation for it because of diving. Getting over that fear has what enabled me to have that awesome new perspective. And it's so cool because since I got my certification in Palau, I was able to go to the Philippines with a Palauan family on a spring break trip, and I got to go scuba diving over there. Totally blew my mind of the way I was able to experience the Philippines because of that. And then the summer of 2017, I had the opportunity to go to Israel on an archaeology tour. We went over to Jordan, Amman, Jordan, and got to go to the Red Sea, which was cool. And the option came up, hey, you want to snorkel or you want to scuba dive? Oh man, I'm going scuba diving. I got to scuba dive in the Red Sea because of that experience. It opened up a whole new world of experience and awesome just things that I could see and do in life because of getting over that fear of diving and realizing that, you know what, down there and in this completely new world, I'll be all right. When I think of the situations that are going on right now, I see and I find that too often people want to change the way that other people think without taking the time to understand why they think the way that they do. In the diving situation, it didn't matter. I couldn't get past my fear enough to understand that what they were telling me was actually something that could work. Breathing underwater is such a foreign concept to me that I thought that was impossible. I didn't take the time to understand why they thought the way that they did and realize how everything worked. And there was a big disconnect, and there is a big disconnect. And it kind of ends up getting summed up in this idea of the way that you think, not only is it wrong, but it's also not even worth understanding. And that's where I made my mistake. I thought that the way that scuba divers were thinking was completely wrong, and because of my fear, I didn't want to even give them a chance to explain it. It took me 5 years to get past that and to be willing to listen. Interesting. This kind of mentality is something that we have to get beyond. Obviously, today we're dealing with a lot of really sensitive issues such as all lives matter, such as white privilege, such as Black Lives Matter. And I bring up these three in particular at this moment in this episode because I'm going to try to sum it up with an incomprehensive example. Okay. So I spent a lot of time as a teacher in Palau, and so the classroom is where I get a lot of my lessons from, and flow with me for this example right here. There's a classroom, you're a teacher, okay? And you have, let's say 20, 30 students. You got a lot of students in class. Every single one of your students is not the same, okay? And in my example, in my experience, my real experience in Palau, we have students from Palau, we have students from Australia, United States, Taiwan, China, Japan, Philippines, all over the place, right? And each one of these different students is coming from a different background that I am not aware of. And thankfully I got to know some of these things, but it takes time. Point is, they come from different backgrounds, different experiences, and all of their experiences are going to impact the way that they respond to me as a teacher in the classroom. I'm teaching and I'm sending to them one set of messages, right? The content, whatever it is. And yet that one set of messages, as it's being sent, is being received in 20 or 30 different ways based on the backgrounds and the life experiences of my students. Man, there's so many different ways to go with this, but I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. Obviously, you have students there who are in the classroom and they don't even speak English. It's not their first language. It's not their second language, and they're trying to make it their third language. That's the reason that they're there in the school. And for a teacher, sometimes it can be very frustrating because the same way that you communicate with these students over here, you can't communicate with them. You have to change it up and you have to do it differently to reach them. But what about from the perspective of the students? You're going to have those students who clearly need more attention, and that's exactly what happened. In Palau, a lot of the foreign students we ended up being closer to a degree because they came and sought us out more because they needed more help understanding the content in class after school. At night, when we'd be in our dorm and in our living arrangement, they'd come knocking on the doors looking for help. That was opportunities to interact with those students that they had because they were behind all the other students, and we ended up being closer with some of them in many regards as opposed to the rest of the class because we simply didn't spend the same amount of time with them. But all students matter, right? Should I not have given those students special attention and helped them out knowing that they were behind because all students matter? Should I have continued to have this same approach that I was giving that really benefited the students who were on the same wavelength as me and continue to let the students who didn't understand and who had these other different barriers to their learning experience, just let them get left behind because all students matter? See, when we talk about the common ground that I had as a teacher with the students who were on the same understanding as me, they had a privilege of being exposed to the English language before coming to the school. So they had an advantage that made it easier for them to learn and easier for them to progress in their education than the other students because of this particular advantage that they had. But if I, as a teacher, was to say, you know what, I'm just going to keep on giving the students who are clearly picking up what I'm throwing down in a classroom, if I'm going to keep just going with their flow and leave all the rest behind, then I cannot, as a teacher, say that all students matter because my actions are proving that they don't. And for a student in the classroom who is going to say, hey, teacher, why are you spending more time with those students who don't speak English? Why don't you just continue to teach us? We don't like that you have to slow everything down to make sure that they're getting it. We're getting bored. We don't have time for this. We just want to move ahead. If one of those students were to say, teacher, you can't spend the extra time with them because we all matter, it would come across as very callous. And you get what I'm saying, right? I'm hoping that a simple analogy like this helps us to understand the difference and the problems in an argument like all lives matter. Guys, it's obvious all lives do matter. We know that. We understand that. Well, most people do. But the bottom line is, I can't look at my classroom and value one set of students above the other and then try to say that all my students matter. Because in my actions, I'm showing that I don't. Every group of students in the class may not need the exact same level of attention, but they do need attention, and some will need more than others. That's how a teacher proves that all of his students matter, by being willing to reach out to each student where they are and to lift them up to the same level of academic excellence. That's what it's about. If the students who already speak English are upset or have a problem with a teacher who wants to help all the students be able to understand the content, that's something the student needs to try to be a little bit more open-minded about. Because the reality is, it is true that things move slower when the class is not on the same page. But what happens when the whole class is on the same page? How much faster can you move ahead? How much more are you able to learn and experience as a group because everyone is on the same page and everyone understands what the teacher's giving at the same time and at the same speed? That's how I'm summing up those three issues and those controversial points of all lives matter, white privilege, and Black Lives Matter. And if it wasn't clear, feel free to send a message, talk about it. No problem. This is a place for conversation. This is not a place for judgment. People that I know, I say this all the time, I have zero interest in judging people, but I'm always down for encouragement, enlightenment, and education, which is what I always say that in the beginning of every episode, and that's what it's all about. All right. So thank you for your understanding, and thank you for your willingness to challenge those things and to continue to ask those questions. If you have a disagreement or if you're curious, whatever it is, I'm open. Now, when I look at my own personal experience, I know I have not had the same advantages as many other people. I was talking with my brother and some friends the other day, and they talked about some different ways that they'd been mistreated and looked at differently simply because of the color of their skin. We get that, you know. I've had issues with law enforcement where I hadn't done anything wrong, and I knew I didn't, and yet they're bothering me with A, B, and C. Okay. At the same time, while I have had those experiences, I want to make sure to throw out there that a few bad apples shouldn't ruin the whole bunch. Like, you may have had this idea of blanket judgments, not even blanket statements, but blanket judgments. The stereotypes, as they say, I don't like that. And I think that we need to get away from that. Just because I don't have the same advantages as somebody who may have come from a different background as me doesn't mean that everyone from that culture and everyone from their side is wrong. It doesn't mean that everyone from their side is trying to put me down just because of the few people I may experience who did. Just because I had those few unnecessary incidents with law enforcement doesn't mean that every single police officer out there is evil and is out to get me and is going to try to kill me the first chance that they get. And in fact, you know, especially when it comes to something like that, you really have to be careful, generally speaking, with what the media puts out there and how they portray it, because we know that there's good cops out there. We understand that. I hope we understand that. But a few bad apples, and their stories are the ones, the negative ones, they're the ones that get highlighted. So everyone has a problem with all police. Just try to be a little bit more open-minded there, and understand that while you do want to stand up and say your piece, so that a system that allows for those isolated incidents, you want to stand up for your rights, so that the system that allows for that can kind of have to go over some kind of reformation and not allow for those instances to happen, to not allow for the few bad apples to take over and to put the majority on everyone's bad side. It takes a willingness to adjust our perspectives, even as well as from the perspective within. And this is something that I'm going to keep coming back to. For this whole thing to work, for the classroom to function smoothly, everyone has to be understanding not only of where they are as an individual, but where the other people are coming from as well. And the thing that makes it tough is it takes real conversations, painful conversations, and a self-awareness that a lot of people don't have, to realize that, you know what, things really are different for me than they are for you. And that takes a level of real humility, and then beyond that, a level of brotherly love, to say, man, I wish we could all have a better experience. I wish we could all be on the same playing field. It's not that the student who already knows English needs to say, well, I'm gonna come to class and I'm never gonna speak English again, and I'm gonna forget that I learned English, and no, it's not about taking down and losing the advantage you have. It's about saying, hey, how can I help my fellow classmates learn better? I had an experience in a canvassing program where it was my first summer. We had a couple girls who came and they spoke no English. They're in a canvassing program, 10 weeks. We're going to be going door to door, getting books out there, and they spoke no English. How are they going to learn to canvass? And especially in a situation like that, you know, students, it's easier as a student because you're typically just worried about yourself and your own performance. I saw something so powerful there. I saw students who were taking time. Some of the better sellers, the higher producers in the program, were taking their own time to draw pictures of a face and to point and say, this is the eye, this is the nose. Like, they're literally taking time to teach English to these students who can speak no English. And why? Not because when the student learns and is able to speak English and to go out and do the canvas, not because that the one who taught them is going to get some of their profit. No. Simply because they wanted to see that other student succeed. And you know what? The student who was taught, one of them in particular, who was taught English in this way by these different pictures, she ended up staying for a couple summers and she became one of the best sellers in the program because of the influence and because other top sellers were willing to say, you know what? I understand that I'm up here. I understand that I have this advantage that enables me to be up here and you're down here because you don't understand this language. But I want you to be able to do life and to do the canvas the way that I can. I want you to be able to experience it at the same level. That's powerful. And it takes, you talk about humility. You talk about brotherly love. That's what it's all about. I want you to have the same experience. I want you to have a better experience. So that brings me to this thing about protesting. I apologize. It's allergy season. When I was in Palau, I didn't have to deal with allergies for the last 4 years. I forgot that I had them. I'm getting that rude wake-up call right now. I still got them. But at this point, it brings me to the idea of protests. And again, on both sides, it comes down to this idea of the few bad apples. We see the things that are put out there about members of law enforcement that are continually excessively brutal to people who are peacefully protesting. It shouldn't characterize the entirety of that. But at the same time, that's also something that needs to stop straight up. We can't have people that we look to for safety and security hurting people. Like, that's what the whole system is for, due process, you know. If things should get to a point like that. And that's what the issue is. The issue is that an officer, we understand the risk. We understand that they're out there on the front line. We understand that they do a lot in terms of defending others. We get that. But they're not supposed to be judge, jury, executioner. There's other positions that are for that. So there is a level of enforcement, and we get that. But at the same time, there's a problem that some people may be taking advantage of within this collective, the law enforcement agencies. Some people may be taking advantage of what the system allows for them to do. So the protest is not against the people as much as it is against the policies that enable those who are going to take advantage of those things. We have to understand that. And on the flip side, you have people who are saying, oh, peaceful protest, what is that going to accomplish? And then you have the others there are people out there who are looting, which has zero connection. Like for me, I'm not down with looting whatsoever. I don't see the productivity to it. I don't see how it helps you in your case. If you're going to loot and steal, you're breaking the law, which puts you at more risk of having to have an interaction with law enforcement. That makes no sense to me. That's something that I am not for. But at the same time, those who are doing that are not characteristic of all of the collective of the protesters. And so I can't dismiss the authenticity and the genuineness of what the protests are for based on that small group of looters who are operating under the guise as protesters. I can't do that. I have to be able to broaden my level of understanding and to not see the forest for the trees, as they say. You have to be able to separate those things, in my opinion. And again, if you disagree, please feel free. Send a message, reach out. Let's talk about it. That's what this is all about. Having these conversations. And on either side, I think we have to realize that the why is more important than the what. This is something that I tell my students all the time. The why is more important than the what. Don't just look at the what people are doing and the what people say. Look at the why behind what they're doing and the why behind what they say. This, I think, will give us a better idea of what's really going on and helping us to understand it. If we can understand the why behind why certain members of law enforcement take advantage of the position that they're in to act so brutally towards others, then it'll help us to be able to correct that issue. If we're able to look at the why behind why so many people are out in the streets protesting, less afraid of coronavirus and more afraid of a system that will continue to perpetuate brutality. If we look at the why behind that, then we understand something. We understand the validity to the protest. The why is always more important than the what, and it brings a level of understanding that just a surface level experience with the ocean is not going to do. You have to be willing to go a little bit deeper. And I say you have to go a little bit deeper because my next point has to do with the numbers. A lot of people want to bring up statistics and numbers when it comes to police, things like police brutality. And some of the popular numbers that come out is that there are just as many, if not more, white people who are killed by police than black. And if you only stay at a surface level, and if you look at a numbers perspective, that very well may be true. But here's the issue. When one of these groups experiences brutality by law enforcement, it's a reminder and a refresher of 400 years and more of pain and oppression, and a reminder that while things generally may seem better, it also seems like the value of my life is still worth not much more than it was all those years ago. There's one group who has this response and this feeling when they see it, because it's a reminder of the way things were. Things are still the same. Other groups don't have that background, so it doesn't bring up that same feeling. It doesn't bring up that same tension. Is it wrong either way and against any race? Absolutely. But again, broaden your perspective and look beyond just a surface level understanding of this, and see that there's more going on. There's so much more that contributes to the response because of the past and because of the history. That's something that we have to understand if we're really going to get the point of why people have a problem with something like these instances of police brutality against black people in particular. Now, with all that being said, in spite of all of that, even, there's a question that I have. And this question is it possible to rise above this? Is it possible? You know, we see a lot of initiatives there, and there may be reasons why we see at this particular time in history so many different companies and corporations backing up the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm not trying to get into all the politics of that. I am encouraged by seeing so many different people who have been willing to stand up for the black community and say, you know what, we want to lift these people up to a higher level and to be a help and a calm in the midst of such a storm. So, you know, there's many ways that I've seen different things that people are doing to try to rise above and to try to bring people up in the situation. But there's something you need to understand. Rising above requires growth. And you cannot grow if you stay in your comfort zone. To rise above requires growth, and you cannot grow if you stay in your comfort zone. There's a lot of people who look at the situation, and you can tell by the conversations that have been had, a lot of things being put out there in the media of what big athletes and, you know, all different kinds of people are saying or even not saying in their silence. And there's a level of comfort zone that you can still see that people are stuck there, and their comments come across as insensitive and so on and so forth because they're coming from the standpoint of that comfort zone. And at this point, I want to give a shout out because when these things started popping off, there's a few people who reached out to me and wanted to get my opinion on some things. And And I'll give them a shout out. Zane Browning, a couple of my missionary buddies, Zane and Ben DePass. Man, these are my dudes, man. I'll go to battle with these guys any day of the week, no doubt. And we did, literally, playing basketball out there together. But, you know, they reached out. They extended first to me to find out, you know, what can they learn and how can they get better about dealing with the things that are going on in this time. And just to kind of share a little bit, Ben mentioned to me in particular that some of his friends who come from different backgrounds or perhaps even the same background, they don't appreciate his friendship and his openness to try to understand what's going on. And this comes to it comes right back to the classroom, right? Because a student who has the ability to speak English is going to struggle to understand why the classroom is moving slow, okay? But at the same time, you can't crucify that student for that. Again, they're coming from a different background than the other students, and it's going to take some time for them to adjust and to realize what those differences are and how they can help. That's a process. It's not something that happens overnight. So if the students who don't speak English are only looking at the students who can speak English and they have a problem with them, that's something that the students need to fix within themselves as well. And that's a level of understanding and a broader mentality that those students need as well. It's something that goes both ways. I don't agree with the people who have dropped friendships with those who are trying to understand and trying to see how they can rise above and bring other people up with them. That's a very surface level, shallow view of things. You're not giving people the chance to go through the process to understand and to learn. This is a wake-up call for a lot of different people that, wait a second, maybe things aren't the way that I thought they were. But give these people a chance to understand. Be willing to have those conversations with them. Don't put them in the box of everybody else out there who doesn't get it and who may not be willing to get it just because of their questions. They legitimately may not know. You know, in a class, in the classroom, speaking of, I remember my first year teaching Bible. It's case in point of this very thing. I came into that with my plan, the different way that I wanted to present the things I was going to talk about. Okay, cool. What I didn't take into consideration is the different backgrounds of all my students in the classroom. I remember thinking, well, a student asked me one time, I was talking about David and Goliath. Very common children's story, Bible story. Everybody knows this. You grew up an Adventist, you grew up a Christian, you probably know who David and Goliath is. I brought it up in class to make a point about something else, and one of the students asked me who was David and Goliath. I couldn't believe it, and my initial response was, is this kid serious? How do you not know who this is? Like, we've all grown up. This is like the most basic of Christian education. You know, how do you not know this? And that was a mistake on my part. That was wrong on my part because I made an assumption on what the other person should know and shouldn't know before getting a chance to understand their background and where they were coming from. It turns out that student didn't grow up going to Adventist school. It turns out they grew up in a completely different ideology and religious system where the Bible wasn't anything big for them necessarily. And so that assumption was completely wrong. And I had to realize, you know, everyone who is questioning, they're not doing it to sound dumb. They're not doing it because they're trying to mess with you. That maybe it's because they actually want to learn. Maybe it's because they actually don't know. And this is where that flexibility on both sides comes, where you have to be willing to give someone a chance to ask those questions. That's what it's going to take. Fortunately, in that class setting, I did go back and explain who David and who Goliath were, and we were able to proceed. And on that, it brings up another point that I think is important, something I realized in my teaching. It goes to this level playing field type thing, especially with trying to teach Bible from that perspective to people of so many different backgrounds. I realized when I got into deeper topics, there were so many questions. I had my plan, and I had this idea of what I was going to go through in a week, right? But my plan was getting slowed down because of all these questions that I had. But the questions were not trying to get me to waste my time. The questions were not, they weren't being asked by students who already knew. The questions were the result of the different backgrounds that every single one of these students had. And I was presenting this topic still from the standpoint of all that I understood, not from what they understood. They had pieces in their educational structure that were missing, building blocks that they needed that I had because of the way that I grew up. They didn't have them, so they're asking these questions to fill in the blanks. And so while I'm at this level right here trying to get to here with their education, they have a lot of things that are missing here that they're trying to get so they can get up to that level that I'm teaching on. I had to answer those questions, and I ended up telling the students, always ask questions. They took advantage of that, and I loved it. And eventually, when the class got to this point here where we were all cool with all the building blocks that it took to be able to understand this concept here, then we took the next step. And we were able to grow together as a class so much better as a result. That was some of the most fun that I have, but it took a lot of patience. And that plan that I had that was just supposed to take a week, sometimes it took literally a month. Lesson plans, right? But it wasn't just a job, and I wasn't there to just push my agenda regardless of who was understanding or not. I needed to understand that if the students were going to get this point, they had to understand everything else that went into it first. And then once we were able to achieve being on the same playing field, the same level of understanding, then we could move forward. As a teacher, oftentimes losing your lesson plan is very uncomfortable. There's a sense that you feel like things are not in your control anymore because now it's the students who are kind of directing what's going on, and you're more reacting. But the encouragement and the insight here is that that's okay. That comfort that comes from thinking that you already know it all, that's something that you have to be willing to abandon. That's what the point is. On either side, you have to get out of the comfort zone of your thought and your perspective and say, you know what? Maybe I don't know it all. Maybe these questions are not coming from a facetious or a disrespectful standpoint. Maybe they're asking this because they simply don't know. Maybe they're asking that because they simply don't get it. That openness on both sides is what's needed if this conversation is going to go anywhere. We don't understand it all. There's a lot of people right now who are seeing the things that are going on, who are watching the protests, and they don't get it. What's happening right now, it's a bullhorn. It's people trying to get the attention of so many to say, hey guys, we don't know everything. We don't have all the answers, but we're willing to talk about it. We're willing to educate about it, and we're willing to seek to grow together. It's going to hurt, but we can grow. Doctors, they often have to cut and cause pain to remove cancer. I hope that we aren't so scared of the pain that we're willing to let something inside kill us. I hope that we aren't so scared of a new experience that we let our fears keep us from experiencing a whole new kind of world. When it comes to religion, I've seen, there's a lot of controversial topics, not topics. There's a lot of controversial presentations and perspectives that have been put out there by a lot of people who are known to speak up and be very vocal in Christianity. I'm talking about peers, I'm not just talking about like organizations or anything. Just your regular people, that a lot of people had this idea that they were this way, and then their presentation, and then everyone's pumping the brakes like, man, what's really going on here? But I think the bottom line for me, from a religious perspective, it comes down to this. We talk about the mission, right? And I think there's a very clear mission that scripture tells us about. And the verse that immediately popped into my head once all this stuff started happening and the Black Lives Matter movement was Isaiah 58 verse 10. And just recently I decided to look at more of the chapter, and it's so funny when you isolate yourself on a verse that goes with your way of thinking. It's easy for you to forget that you actually already know and you're familiar with some of the other things in that verse. And I feel like that happens on so many levels, even with situations like this. But one thing I wanted to make sure of was that I wasn't taking this one verse out of context. So I looked back into the entire chapter of Isaiah 58 because I wanted to see where's this coming from. I definitely wanted to make sure that I wasn't taking anything out of context just because I thought of that singular verse. And so I'm going to read verses 6 through 12. This is the entire phrase that verse 10 is included in. And this is verse 10. It says, if you extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted, the oppressed soul, then your light shall shine in the darkness, and your darkness will be as the noonday. This is what I posted on my social media in response to the things that were going on. I thought it was very pertinent. But now, as I'm talking about it, I wanted to get a little bit more perspective in the right context. So here's what it says, verse 6. And before I read that, the context of the first few verses of the chapter is talking about people who are doing things because they think that's what God wants. And now God is responding in verse 6 to tell them what he's really all about. So verse 6, is this not the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you bring to your house the poor who are cast out? When you see the naked, that you cover him and not hide yourself from your own flesh? Then your light shall break forth like the morning. Your healing shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing finger and speaking wickedness, if you extend your soul to the hungry, and if you satisfy the afflicted and the oppressed soul, then your light shall shine and dawn in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought and strengthen your bones. You shall be like a watered garden and like a spring of water. Those waters do not fail. Those from among you shall build the old waste places. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets to dwell in. Man, I read this. It slapped me left and right. I didn't realize that it was this deep. When you go through the Bible, the mission of God's people has always been to do this, to stand up for the people who are oppressed. And why? Because in doing that is how you show who God really is and the reality of God. It's not enough to stay silent. Israel stayed silent for years. They chose not to do the mission that God had given them. And what ended up happening? Persecution. The captivity of Babylon, Assyria. These are the results of what happened. Their nation ended up being destroyed because they weren't willing as a whole to do this mission that God had for them as a people. What about today? I think we stand a much better chance and a much better, as Christians, we stand a much better chance of proving to the world the reality of God by standing up for our brothers and our sisters who don't have the same privileges we do. And again, it comes right back to that classroom, because a lot of people are very quick to say what it is, right? Yeah, we believe that Jesus is the greatest thing ever, and salvation, this and that. But unless you try to understand where the people you're trying to reach are coming from, your efforts are not going to succeed. You don't want to be like a spring that is dried up. You want to be like this watered garden. You don't want to be contributing to the hurt and the pain and the destruction of people. We want to contribute to raising up the foundations of many generations. We want to be a part of building up the old places that people looked at and called a waste. We want to be the repairers of the breach. There is a breach right now. There has been. And there's a particular movement in this particular time that is calling a little bit more attention to that breach than has been in the past. I think we have a duty, if we call ourselves Christians, to stand up and to say that, yeah, it's true. Black lives matter. And to realize that the statement of all lives matter can never be true until Black lives matter. To realize that, yeah, those students in my class who come from different backgrounds that are not spiritual and they don't speak English, those students matter. And my best educational experience in a classroom, I'm going to have more fun in the classroom once everybody is on the same playing field. And I don't say that because it sounds good and it's just hyperbole. I'm saying that because it's true. I have a lot of great and better relationships with the foreign students in my classes. And a lot of that comes from the extra time that I spent with them to help them to learn and to understand the things that they didn't understand in the beginning. And I keep up with them all the time, and it's so cool because I'm really looking forward to this. There are several of them that I'm going to be able to have on the podcast soon, and you're going to hear their experience coming from a background completely different than mine and having to learn all of these things just to be on a level playing field with the rest of the class. Absolutely incredible. That's what it's all about. And it made everything about my experience. As Christians, our purpose, we have to realize that, and the point is that we do a lot of things that we think are acceptable. We think that's what God wants, but they're really not. A lot of us have been missing that point. Right here in these verses, we have a great description of what God wants us to do for people who are less privileged and the oppressed and the afflicted around us, whoever they are. In fact, you go further into the New Testament and you see that those people that are referred to as good and faithful servants, right? The ones that Jesus actually knows, those are the ones who have lived lives that reflect this truth. Keep it simple, Christians. I tell my students in the class all the time, it's us humans who have complicated religion. And all those complications are what have turned a lot of people off to it. Just keep it simple. Jesus kept it simple. He kept it so simple. And I'm going to bring it home with Jesus right here. I saw a lot of people commenting very quickly when the protests became violent that Jesus overturned tables too. As if the purpose of Jesus doing that was similar. It wasn't. And I think that's a cop-out. To be honest, I really think that's a cop-out. Because you have to look at what Jesus' mission was. What was his mission? He was here, yes, to redeem a people that had fallen under the worst affliction and the worst oppression and sin. And he wanted to Yes, indeed, level the playing field. And part of him overturning those tables had to do with that. But what was his why? Why was he doing that? Think about that for a second. Why was he doing that? I think the power in the life and in the story of Jesus is the things that he did always had such a bigger purpose and a bigger scope that a lot of people didn't realize. For me personally, I can't use Jesus overturning tables as something to justify violence and violent protesting and the destruction that's happened as a result. I don't. I use it to say that Jesus was willing to get the attention of people to help make things fair. That's the difference between looting and what Jesus did. They're not the same. They're not the same. Jesus didn't do that because of something he was going to gain. He did it for what other people could gain. It wasn't about himself. And to me, that's the most incredible thing. Jesus, the one person who could have made it about himself, the most important person to ever walk this planet. The things that he did were not about himself, and they were not about his gain. That's the difference. That's the difference. And when you look at the majority of the statements and the protests that Jesus made, they were not characterized by that. In fact, and a lot of people don't even take this into consideration, the times that Jesus was the most vocal and the times that he was the most violent, if you want to use that word, it was in response to the people who actually knew and had a perfect understanding of exactly what they were doing. Jesus wasn't making any assumptions and putting everybody into a group. He was calling out a very specific group of people. When it comes to the protests and the things today, are we lumping everyone together? Are we assuming that because someone comes from a background that we classify as privilege, that every single one of those people thinks the exact same way? Are we putting them all in that same group? They don't all belong in that group. They may have experienced the privilege, but many of the people, the same way that I personally have not experienced slavery, many of those people are living the result of something that happened hundreds of years ago. And maybe not even hundreds of years ago in many cases. But they're living the result. They weren't the ones that perpetuated it. It's not fair to put them all in the same group. They don't belong there. It's a different story for the ones who were the Pharisees, though, because they knew. And if we want to get into who's the Pharisees of these days, that's not the purpose of why I'm here. That's not the purpose of why I'm bringing up this point. What I'm saying is it takes a level of understanding and a willingness on both sides to try to learn and to separate the bad apples from the rest of the bunch. And then by all means, you make the point you have to make towards the bad apples and towards a system that allows them to do the things the way that they do. That's what Jesus turning the tables was about. And in fact, I've never heard, or I haven't heard yet, can't say never, don't want to put any blanket statements out there and cut off what people may be saying, but I didn't hear the people who mentioned Jesus overturning tables talk about how he dealt with the poor. I didn't hear the people talking about Jesus' one of his last acts being one of utter destruction, be how no one was actually hurt. I didn't hear the people who talked about Jesus overturning tables be about the fact of what happened right after that. That he was creating an environment where people were welcome. I didn't hear any of that. I didn't hear that the same Jesus who overturned tables is the same one who allowed himself to be nailed to the cross. I didn't hear that Jesus who allowed himself not only to be nailed to a cross, but he also said, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. I didn't hear anything about what Jesus went through personally there. I saw the justification of a singular moment in time, which I didn't agree with. Jesus, in his greatest pain, did not seek of his own. Jesus, in his greatest pain, he sought to give, not to receive. When everything was being taken from Jesus, he sought to give. My goodness. That's the example. That is the example. And that's powerful. What can we give now? People who are being oppressed, those who are in support of the movements to make change, what can you give? If you're going into the protest with the mentality of what can I get, you're doing it the wrong way. What can you give? Jesus wanted to give. His entire life was about giving us an opportunity, giving us a chance to experience something we had never done before, and in a peaceful way. What can we give? Man, that's powerful. I'm sitting here having to think about it myself. A lot of these words are just happening in the moment. You know, we're hearing a lot now about the Black Lives Matter movement. And I agree that we should. This is something that we need to hear about now. But there are not enough people out there that care about the black people who have been put down as a people for hundreds of years. There are not enough people out there that care about the little boys and little girls who are being trafficked and passed by without a second thought. There are not enough people that care about the abused women who are too afraid to speak for themselves. There are not enough people following in with the mission of Christ. But there are some. And those movements, each and every one of them, and that's only a few, there are so many more. Without a doubt, there are more. We have an opportunity now to join our voices with them. And perhaps one of the greatest things that you can do as you join your voices, not just speak. Don't just be a part of the what. Get beyond that and be a part of the why. Be a safe place of communication, understanding, and growth. Get to understanding that why. You know, each of these movements, and for the many, many different movements out there, there will be a time to stand with each and every single one. There will be a time that every single kid in the classroom needs your support, regardless of where they are. But today, some of the students in the classroom are hurting, and they need our support. There's a community that is hurting, and they need our support. Of course, all the students matter. But we prove that by giving our attention and our support to each individual student when they need us most. And our primary mission has to reflect that truth. My encouragement: don't approach the situation with a what's in it for me mentality. See what you can give, even in the face of your pain. Don't be afraid to ask people who are different than you about their experience. And for those of you who are receiving the question about what it's like to be like you, Don't look at the person like they're crazy and just being disrespectful. Come from a standpoint seeking to understand. Try to put yourself in their shoes. Try to understand their why and not just the what. Realize that we're all just students in the classroom. And every single one of us, we all have differences that have impacted our learning experience. Get beyond the surface level of these issues and dive deep. It'll be okay. You'll still be able to breathe. And you just might find that there's a new world with even more beauty there than you ever thought possible. As always, to exist, it's not enough. To stand by silently, it's not enough. We out here to be out here. Until next time, peace.